Hello, and welcome to the State of 911 webinar series, hosted by the National 911 Program. My name is Sherry, and I will be the moderator for today's session. This webinar series is designed to provide useful information for the 911 stakeholder community about federal and state participation in the planning, design, and implementation of Next Generation 911, or NG911 systems. It includes real experiences from leaders utilizing these processes throughout the country. Today's session will provide an update on the Public Safety Telecommunicator Job Reclassification effort, along with the preparations of the Georgia Emergency Communications Authority is making for the transition to Next Generation 911. For closed captioning, please copy and paste the URL link in the chat window to an additional web browser. For more information on the National 911 Program webinars, or to access archived recordings or learn more about the National 911 Program, please visit 911.gov. Feedback or questions about the webinars can be sent to National 911 Team at missioncriticalpartners.com. The National 911 Program would also like to invite you to visit the 911 Telecommunicator Tree of Life and share the name of a remarkable 911 telecommunicator who has inspired you. Share your story at 911treeoflife.org to honor a special 911 telecommunicator who is making a difference in your community. Please note that all participants' phone lines have been put in a listen-only mode, and this webinar is being recorded. To ask questions of our presenters, feel free to take one of two actions. Using GoToWebinar's question feature located on the right-hand side of your screen, enter your question at any time during the presentation, and it will be entered into the queue. This feature may not be visible while your screen is in the expanded page view. Or if you'd like to ask a question live, use the raise hand feature to request your phone line be unmuted. You will be called upon to ask your question. Individuals registered for this webinar will receive access to today's PowerPoint presentation along with the webinar recording. With that, I would like to turn it over to Lori to introduce our first speakers, Kate Elkins and Molly Falls. Lori?
Thanks, Sherry. We might be tag teaming this first presentation a little bit, but the two people who are going to be presenting the bulk of this presentation are Kate Elkins and Molly Fall. Kate is an EMS and 911 specialist here at NHTSA, and Molly Fall is a senior technology specialist with Mission Critical Partners who have handled, and frankly, all the logistics as we've pulled this project together. So ladies, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lori. Next slide, please. So we are talking about the Public Safety Telecommunicator Job Reclassification Project, the Toolkit and resources. We're going to go over some background and then the current initiatives, and then Molly's going to take over and go over the Toolkit and resources and some next steps. So next slide, please. So a little bit of background on this project. The Bureau of Labor Statistics has the standard occupational classification system for jobs. This is a database. It is a collection of objective data upon which decisions are made and on how hundreds of jobs are classified. So every 10 years, they reevaluate the data. This is a statistical system and oftentimes used for research and statistical purposes. So every 10 years, they look at the data and evaluate the classifications. So the next time that the public safety telecommunicator job could be evaluated is we're looking at 2028. And the motivation for this project really was to provide the data, but also recognizing that the reasons why there was no reclassification the last time really impacts this profession in the field. So in 2018, the reclassification effort was not successful, partially because there was not objective data that really supported the cause. So having objective, measurable evidence of the work that is done, the job descriptions being up to date. We really can't have job descriptions older than our telecommunicators. And having that data was really the motivation for this project, so that they would have the data to drive a decision to potentially change this classification. So the job description, job title, hiring and recruitment, education and training, certifications that are required, tools and technology, all of this information is what was evaluated by the BLS SOC with the last look at this job position. So when they didn't find the data they needed, they kept the 911 telecommunicator position classified under the administrative support occupation. Our goal is not just for the BLS SOC, but for this profession as a whole, to improve the understanding of the job, to improve accurate job descriptions for those who are sitting under the headset, having appropriate titles, information about education, training, certification, etc. So that really was the motivation for the start of this project. Next slide, please. The cool thing is there are initiatives all across the country at the state and local level reclassifying telecommunicators. The information, providing this data, improved job descriptions, improved job titles, improved descriptions of the education, the training, the tools, the technology, everything that is done under that headset and in the PSAP helps at the local, state, and national level to move this profession forward. So I'm going to hand off to Molly as she discusses more of the details of the toolkit, but I just want to sort of highlight that reclassification is already happening at the state level, and there are some really cool things that have been accomplished already at local and state levels with the evolution of these data points and descriptions and the profession as a whole. Next slide.
Thanks, Kate, for the introduction. As Kate mentioned, my name is Molly Falls, and I have been kind of the program project manager helping coordinate the efforts to really develop this toolkit for use at the local and state levels. As the previous slide showed, and as Kate mentioned, there are a lot of great things happening at the state levels. And this toolkit was developed to help address both local and state level needs to help PSAPs and ECCs prepare for future reclassification efforts. So, as we evaluated the approach to developing this toolkit and putting out materials that will be valuable and usable for ECCs, we took some time to really evaluate what was needed and what we should focus on to help enable the creation of programs that really truly demonstrate the demands of the job of a public safety telecommunicator. So we started looking at job descriptions, job titles, the hiring and recruiting process, education and training with a focus on certification. And then we started looking at tools and technology and the different professional and trade associations that go along with this profession. And all of these items, right to Kate's earlier point, fall into, helping get the data and the information to make data-driven decisions. And from all of this, the toolkit, the reclassification toolkit was born. And, ultimately, all of those items that I just discussed, job descriptions, hiring, education, tools, we found that it really fit into 4 key areas that are complementary to, the efforts going on at the federal level, as well as then that would also help improve conditions and help ECCs develop resources at the local level, as well as advanced state level preparedness. So the first part of the toolkit is focused on, it provides guidelines for developing a public safety telecommunicator job description. We found that in many situations, job descriptions were outdated and hadn't been updated for many years. And there was a need to, update the job descriptions to really accurately reflect the expectations of the position, the demands of the position, the expectations, they have grown over time as technology and public expectations have grown. So it's very important that we felt it was very important to develop a guideline for and help the ECCs have some tools to review and assess what's needed in developing a job description. Today, the job description, this guideline for developing a job description is already available on 911.gov. So that is one part of the toolkit that is available. These next three parts are not yet published. And this is a bit of a teaser to show you what's coming, which we anticipate all of these being released, in the December timeframe. We also then wanted to really focus on establishing or expanding your public safety telecommunicator training program. So a really helping, a lot of telecommunicators go through training, and a lot of states have requirements around minimum training requirements. But as we see, the demands of the position and look to really heighten the level of professionalism with the job, we thought it was important to help, provide some guidance around, what is recommended for, developing the level of training and recertification that's important to help prepare and provide the information necessary, and again, build the data points to support future reclassification efforts. We see that other first responder positions mandate training, so we wanted to help raise a focus on what is required for telecommunicators and, just, again, provide that quantifiable data. You'll see and I'll talk more about what's included in this toolkit in subsequent slides. The third component of the toolkit is guidelines for operational integration of technology and tools. We basically created this list of all the technology and tools used in the ECCs today. And that expansive list, it is so expansive. The expectations on our telecommunicators and staff at the ECCs, to understand and be able to navigate, on when they're supporting a call, the list is exhaustive, and there is a lot that is expected. So one way to address and highlight and establish data that identifies the technology and tools was to focus on the integration of those technologies and tools and look at the processes and procedures that are used in the ECC to help, again, highlight the expectations of the position. And then lastly, the first three really focus on the local level. What can you do at the ECC? But we felt it was also important to develop to help, provide some guidelines in building a legislative strategy. So as you saw on the previous slide, there are a number of states taking the initiative to reclassify at the state level and local level. So we felt that in addition to building up the data and the materials to support with future federal reclassification efforts, it's also in parallel could be beneficial to address a legislative strategy and look at doing this at the local and state level. We see these as complementary efforts that tie together. All of this ties together to help just re-emphasize and the importance of the position and help with, the classification and I guess the classification that our public safety telecommunicators are so deserving of. Before I move on to the job description and really getting into the next slide with the details of the public safety telecommunicator job description toolkit, Lori or Kate, is there anything you wanted to add here?
No, ma'am, go for it.
All right, next slide. So what I want to do now is walk through the details at a high level of what's included with each toolkit. So, like I said, we wanted to provide usable materials to help at the local level really assess where you are with your job descriptions, your training, and your processes and procedures. So focusing on the public safety telecommunicator job description, these are just some of the highlights of steps that are recommended, steps that you can take to enhance or develop a job description. So we first first step sounds very basic, but it really is to understand the job requirements. So step back, review the expectations of your employees and, from soup to nuts, from beginning to end, what are the expectations of the individuals behind the headset? Review the job duties, identify your key components. The document takes time to walk through each of these steps and help you evaluate what you need to add to your job descriptions. And then also, it recommends engaging your hiring authority. So who's in charge of hiring, who maintains the job descriptions, getting to know, what the requirements are of your HR department or whomever is responsible for hiring and maintaining the job descriptions, and work together to develop the materials and then use that for future recruiting efforts. And then lastly, you'll see this as a common theme across all of the toolkits, is to consult trusted resources. So use this document. You'll see through this document, it walks you through things to consider. It also provides a model job description, for use and tweaking to fit the needs and expectations of your ECC. Consult and work with other peers in the industry to look at what their job descriptions look like, and then really continue to evaluate and conduct a job task analysis to ensure that the job description, the training, and the processes are all aligned. You'll see again the flow of these documents. It provides you things to consider and understand, gives you the tools and a framework to help pull together your thoughts and your requirements, and then it also gives model documentation that you can use to fit into your needs. The goal with this is really to have materials that can be used individually. So if I just needed to address my job description, to look at that or look at it holistically. So if we move on to the next slide and we look at, the next part of the toolkit, we felt it was important to establish or to address training programs. Some may already have training programs in place and minimum training requirements. So this, is either for those that don't, it is to support in establishing a training program. And if you already do, just to provide some steps and some useful tips to help expand or evaluate the training program. And I think, again, you'll see this common theme. Take some time to assess, right? Understand your training needs. So build upon that work that you did to create the job description or modify your job description. So use your job description looking at the knowledge, skills, and abilities that you expect of your public safety telecommunicators to then assess, what does my training program actually address and cover everything that we expect of our telecommunicators. Engage your training needs. So if you've got a CTO or folks on staff, or you have peers, in neighboring agencies or your state training coordinators, engage others to help review and build your program. So identify your key learning objectives. Make sure they align with the operations in your center, and then make sure that you have evaluation methods in place. So we have tools, or in this toolkit, it walks you through, a format and the steps to follow to when you're engaging with others, developing your training needs, and seeking advice from other ECCs. We look to, make sure that it's a comprehensive program that follows industry guidelines, industry standards, industry expectations. Again, to highlight the importance of the position, look to certify individuals, and again, create a program that provides the data as the future reclassification efforts, begin, so that they can have data-driven decision making. So you'll hear us say data, but it helps not only your employees, but it also helps provide, you want it in a quantifiable format that, allows that assessment for those that aren't necessarily in the day-to-day. Speaking of the day-to-day, if you go to the next slide, I mentioned earlier that we evaluated the technology and tools in the center and have just that exhaustive list. So as we looked at, how can we help PSAPs and locals really capture the technology and tools used in the day-to-day operations of the ECC. We said, it's really looking at the written directives and the policies and procedures that are in place. What policies, procedures, written directives, whichever, terminology you use in your centers, does that accurately and adequately capture and address all of the technology and tools and expectations of the public safety telecommunicators? So again, this helps build a case. It helps show data. It helps show that there are written directives for all of the processes, procedures, technology, and tools in your center, right? And again, the flow of the document, they're all pretty similar. You'll see, here is some background information. Here are some possible, methods and procedures that you can use to evaluate what is in, your processes in the ECC. And then here are some model policies that you can use to help if you need a format or if you need to adjust what you have in place today. Again, really looking at understanding what's in place, engaging your operational folks and your subject matter experts to ensure that your written directives align with your operational practices, and also engaging others, working with your neighbors, working with your peers to evaluate and have discussions around best practices, and then reviewing, again, making sure that those are updated on a regular basis. So these three parts of the toolkit really address what some things you can do at your ECC. And lastly, part 4 is where we wanted to spend some time developing, helping outline the processes for developing a legislative strategy for reclassification. Here we focus on understanding your goals and communications plans, right? So how do you, what talking points, who are your champions? Who do you need to engage to possibly, take action and request action at the local or state level on reclassifying your public safety telecommunicators? And then looking at helping gain an understanding. Not everybody understands what the expectations and what is the demands of this role and the position. So, help decision makers understand 911. So identify champions, identify your decision makers, and then inform them. How can you get out in the community and demonstrate and highlight the expectations and what is actually going on when someone is taking care of someone in need. And then it goes into creating a media plan and how to develop a social media campaign, engage your local news sources, and showcase positive 911 stories. So again, helping understand your goals, helping others understand 911, and how do you do that? Through communications and getting out there and creating a media plan. And then lastly, it focuses on learning the legislative process. So looking at, other bills that are available, what the process is in your state or in your county, and walks through the different steps to help develop that strategy, a legislative strategy for reclassification. Our hope again was to have something that is useful and that really can provide a roadmap to help make forward progress. I would be remiss before we move on to the next slide in not acknowledging, we had a number of participants. We established working groups for each of these toolkits to evaluate the content and the materials and the discussions to really make sure that this was something that was usable. So we had industry experts as well as folks in the PSAPs and that have done these things to really help make sure that this toolkit is something that it can be of use and of value for future reclassification efforts. If you want to go to the next slide, I wanted to highlight here, there's a documents and tools section in 911.gov that has a number of different materials out there in different categories: governance, documentation, operations, standards and best practices. So, I mentioned that the toolkit is not yet fully released, but if you, use this, if you have materials that you feel would be helpful for us and the industry as a whole, feel free. There is a section on here, if you can see, to submit resources. If you have resources or anything you feel would be beneficial to the community, please don't hesitate to submit materials in here and use this, the documents and tools section as a resource as you're doing your own research or looking to, to understand anything that's going on in the industry. And then lastly, next steps. As we roll this out, it will be publicized, but it will only be, we can put it out on 911.gov, but as you get into the materials and you get into the tools, we really encourage feedback as well as communication, sharing the toolkit, sharing the materials with others, asking questions, and submitting resources. So this, we will put the materials out there, and then we really will look for support in the end to continue to socialize this. So there is time. We're doing this now so that ECCs have the time to develop their resources and develop their programs so that the data is available when that reclassification effort comes. That is all I have. Thank you for your time. If you have any for additional information, you can contact Kate or myself, and we'll be happy to answer any questions or provide any guidance.
All right. Thank you, Kate and Molly. And really quickly, before I jump into the questions, I'm going to ask Lori just to make sure you didn't have anything that you wanted to add to that.
Well, I just want to thank again those people who contributed content toward all of these tools. As Molly said, the Mission Critical Partners team was in charge of the logistics for this project, but frankly, the idea of it, for it, and most of the content came from the community. So thank you to them again. As Molly said, they were both in the public and private sector, and their we wouldn't be able to put this toolkit together without their contributions. So thank you.
All right. With that, I know we had a couple of questions come in. And with that, I'm going to ask Sheila, the first question that I see here is, where on the site could we access the job description resources?
This is Lori, I can take that. If you go to 911.gov and you click on current projects on the top navigation bar, one of the choices you'll be able to select is one that includes the term reclassification. So as Molly mentioned, the job description is the tools for writing or rewriting your job descriptions are there now. And frankly, that'd be a good place to look for all the rest of the pieces of the toolkit, because they will be placed on that same web page during the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Okay, thank you. So our next question says, the suggestion is to use Public Safety Telecommunicator for the job title of dispatchers. Is there a recommendation for the call taker job title?
Molly, I don't know. Kate, I don't know that we went down to that level of detail, but go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, Lori. We didn't really get down to that level of detail, but I can follow up. At this point, we really have focused on the Public Safety Telecommunicator and didn't break apart the two per se.
Okay, thank you. And then the next question is, what is the timeline in which parts 2 through 4 of the classification toolkit will become available?
Okay, this is Lori. I'll take that one, because they have to go through the federal clearance process. For those of you that are government employees, you understand. So we're working on that, and fingers crossed, everything will be up within the next, I'm guessing, 2 to 3 weeks.
Perfect. Thank you, Lori. And then the final question was asking if attendees will have access. And yes, all of the attendees today will have access to the slide deck and the recording of today's webinar. It will be posted on 911.gov shortly after the webinar. So look for that in a couple of weeks. And then I believe we have someone with their hand raised. and maybe that question got resolved. All right, so thank you again to Molly and Kate, our presenters. And with that, Lori, I am going to turn it back over to you to introduce our next speaker.
Thanks, Sherry. So our next speaker is Mr. Michael Nix. Michael is the Executive Director of Georgia's Emergency Communications Authority, and he will be sharing information that I am fascinated by on their 911 Directors Academy. Michael, thank you so much for joining us today, and please go ahead.
Thank you, Lori. If you'll go to the next slide. In Georgia, we've identified a number of training gaps as I first came into this role, and a large one was that there was no formal training for new 911 directors when they were coming in. We have new training programs for sheriffs, for police chiefs, for fire chiefs, and for emergency management directors, but we didn't have anything in place for 911 directors. So when we received the federal grant, we wanted to set aside the ability to build a curriculum for specifically for 911 directors. So similar to what the previous speakers were encouraging for the public safety telecommunicators, we conducted a job task analysis and developed some pilot offerings of the 911 Directors Academy. Right now, it's a 40-hour course, and we are in 2 weeks going to be offering our fourth pilot offering. They began in May, then we had our second offering in July, we had our third offering in September, and then we'll have our fourth offering in December. We'll go to the next slide. So we conducted these job task analysis, or what we're calling an occupational analysis workshop, to really analyze the training needs for a 911 director. And so the first thing we did was we brought together 17 incumbent 911 directors over 2 days to talk about what is the role of a 911 director. What do you do? Not necessarily, or not just technologically managing the center, but the HR side, the PR side, and try to take a holistic approach and look at the role of the 911 director. So we had these initial workshops, and then we brought in a validation panel to bring a total of 48 directors that took a look at this initial storyboarding of the role of director. And as you can see, we had over 600 years of experience between those 48 directors to really come up with the role of 911 director. So if you go to the next slide, I'll just explain the occupational analysis a little more. So this is, we used a series of focus groups, and the pictures from the last few slides have been from these actual workshops to capture the role that incumbents have right now as director, and to take a look at those knowledge, skills, and abilities for a director. And then we rated those for criticality and frequency for the specific job of director. So what is absolutely critical to be a director, and then what are you doing as a director? What are you doing most often? Are you most often handling HR? Are you most often handling technology or handling policy? And so if you'll go to the next slide. There we go. This is how we broke it down into the duties of the role of 911 director. And at the top, you can see what was determined as the definition of the 911 director or the emergency communications director. And then these duties, lettered A through F, and then we broke them down into separate tasks for each of those. And then from there, we developed the actual curriculum for the Directors Academy. If you go to the next page, we'll start going through the academy itself. So We developed course outline and objectives, and then we started development right as COVID kicked off, and a little over 1,300 hours of work went into this program from April of 2020, and then we finished the initial review or the initial work in February of this year. And what we've developed is 40 hours of classroom, in-person training, and then we have online classrooms that have student engagement activities and additional reference documents from FCC, from APCO, from the 911 National Program Office. And we've really gone really in depth for each of these roles. And so if you go to the next, I'll go through the course overview, and then we'll go into each unit. So we have the initial registration and orientation, and then you can see each of the 6 units there, and then we have a testing and course completion role at the end of this. And as of right now, we've put, I believe, 37 911 directors through this. But I'll also mention here, we're also opening it up to deputy directors or operation managers, or a number 2 or number 3 in the agency, because we felt it was critically important as we were training these new leaders in 911 that we were also building a continuity of operations into the 911 center as well. Because something that I've seen across the state and across the country is that a lot of times when directors are thrown into this role, it's because they were the senior serving dispatcher, or they had been there the longest. And they were a really good dispatcher, but they didn't necessarily have the HR training or the policy writing training. And so we've tried to take this course and really prepare the incumbent leaders of 911 directors, but also those new deputy directors. And something that we talk about in each of these units is the coming next generation 911 and how that's going to change everything from the landscape into Georgia to how the agency operates, obviously technology, but then even when it comes down to personnel management and looking for a new type of public safety telecommunicator with maybe a different set of skills that haven't been needed in the past, as additional technology and information comes into the center, and then even down to finance and budget. So if you'll go to the next slide, we'll start out with Unit 1 and sort of talk about where we are there and how we relate and talk about the roles of next generation 911 in each of these. So we start out as an introduction to the Georgia Emergency Communications Authority, and we're only 4.5 years old, and we're the state 911 body. But we talk about our roles and responsibilities and how we serve as the state next generation 911 planning organization. And then we also, in the modules following, in the 911 fee collection, we talk about our improved need for funding for next generation 911 deployment. In module 3, we continue on with emergency support function 2 and how that role is going to change in the next generation 911 environment and how we can support centers during a disaster. And then we continue on with critical incident management and the continuity of operations, and talking about how these will change with the new capabilities in the PSAP or the ECC with next generation 911. And then we finish out that unit talking about the regulatory requirements. We talk about standards, and we talk about how future FCC rulings could affect next generation 911 implementation. So if you'll go to the next slide, we'll get into Unit 2 with our leadership development. So we've only got 3 modules here, but we dedicate a good bit of time to this because this is something that we saw, again, that we identified as a gap, was that a lot of times when directors became directors, they didn't necessarily have much leadership training or professional development training at all. And so we go in and we talk about leadership versus management. We do some activities on different behavioral styles. Then we also talk about the opportunities for professional and personal growth and encouraging involvement in the various associations around the country. And then for Unit 3, if you'll go to the next slide, this is where we get into the actual agency operations management. And as you can see, this is what was really identified as most critical and most frequent when it comes to the role of a director. In each of these, we talk about strategic planning, and we talk about that generally for an agency and how your mission may change as we change to next generation 911, and you may have to reevaluate what your mission or vision or value statements are as that role changes. And then we focus a lot on ECC liability. We talk about the current liability that 911 centers face, but then we also talk about the new, with the additional data and information coming into the center, what other pieces of liability may be introduced into the 911 center. And then we continue on with policies and procedures, QA, QI programs, and then we continue to talk about the role of how next generation 911 can play. And we talk about that in Module 8 and Module 9. We're talking about our external communication strategy and building those relationships with our local county commissioners, with the state legislators, with our congressional delegation, and talk about the changing role of the 911 center as we transition to next generation 911. You'll go to Unit 4. This is where we get into the ECC technology or PSAP technology. I'll wait till we get there. We can just go to the next slide for unit. There we go. We've got three modules here within the ECC technology unit. We talk about the existing 911 legacy technology today and sort of how that's going to change in the next gen 911 environment. And then for module 2, obviously we spend a large amount of time going through in detail with network charts, talking about what's going to change with next generation 911, and then what additional broadband implications that these additional broadband applications will be in the 911 center. And then we focus a good bit we close out that day focusing a good bit on cybersecurity and the cybersecurity implications in an IP connected next generation 911 center. Then through Unit 5, if you'll go to the next one, again, this is something that when we were identifying weaknesses and opportunities to help new directors, the personnel management piece was huge. Again, we saw that a lot of directors that became directors didn't necessarily have a lot on the personnel management side. So we talk about the relevant state and federal employment laws. Then we have some open conversation on staffing and scheduling and how that may change with next generation 911. Then continue on with the recruitment, with training, how you handle promotional systems and career development plans. And then we also, at the end, we talk about employee health, wellness, and morale, which is going to be huge at the end state for next generation 911 when we talk about the possibility of pictures and videos coming into the 911 center, and making sure that as a director that you've thought about that and you have a plan in place to be able to best support your public safety telecommunicators. And then finally, we just talk about different disciplinary systems in the 911 center. And then if you'll just go to the next slide for Module 6, we finish out the course talking about finance and budget. Again, something that a frontline telecommunicator or even a supervisor or an ops manager may not have had much to do when they were in their previous role, but is a huge part of their new role, is making sure they understand how local governments handle budgeting and what you need to do to have effective RFPs and RFQs for technology in your center, and especially if you're bringing in new technology for next generation 911. And we talk about how you handle these larger capital asset or capital improvement plans. And we talk a little bit more on employee compensation, and again, touch on how you're going to have to adapt your compensation to the additional roles and skills and responsibilities that are going to come in as we transition to next generation 911. And then just the last slide just sort of goes through again sort of the timeline for how we did this and the long process it's taken from where we started in about this time last year to our first course that happened earlier this spring. And we're going to continue to offer these even after the grant period of performance is over. We had the first 4 sessions covered by the grant. Then we're going to continue to offer these at least twice a year to cover any new directors that come in between courses, and then again I'll open up for any new deputy directors or operations managers that may get promoted into those roles. Again, building that continuity of operations for the 911 center, so that if a director has to step out or resigns, that the next person in knows exactly what to do. So with that, I'll pause and stop if there are any questions.
Thank you, Michael. So as Michael mentioned, we'll start the next Q&A portion of our session. And as a reminder, to ask a question, you can use GoToWebinar's question feature located on the right-hand side, or you can raise your hand. So the first question that we have, Michael, someone says that they might have missed this at the beginning of your presentation, but is this available only for Georgia 911 directors?
Yes, it is right now. We've talked about the possibility of opening up some of the modules to other states, but a lot of it is focused on specific to Georgia. But there are some modules and units that are universally applicable, and so we're looking at ways to be able to bring this to more than just Georgia. But for right now, it's just Georgia.
Okay, thank you. And then the next question that came in asked if your training is available online via Zoom, or is this training you're doing in person?
The training that we're doing right now through the pilot program has been all in person. They have homework and online modules that they do, and there's some pre-course work that they do before they come to the course, and then some afternoon and evening work to prepare for the next day. But all of that has been done in person. But as we go through this, we've been getting feedback from each of the pilot groups for each unit, and identifying different modules that we may be able to bring virtually, and then focus more on the bigger picture topics to have open conversations at the in-person academy. But we still want to have the in-person piece. We've had a lot of good dialogue and conversation that came from having this in person.
Okay, perfect. So the next question says, do you spend any time sharing strategies for advocacy with elected officials and how to navigate the lawmaking process in your training, or even how to get your point across with elected officials when you only have 30 seconds in an elevator with them? Is that something that's covered in your training?
Yes, it is. We cover that in, let's see, let me pull it back up. We cover that in Unit 3 under the Building Relationships and Implementing Public Policy. We talk about the strategy on how to get your message across, figuring out what that elevator speech is for your agency and what your ask is, either to a county commissioner or to a state legislator. So yes, we do spend a good bit of time talking about that, and that module specifically I teach and talk about that with our directors.
Perfect. So Michael, I also have, and in the essence of time, I'm going to kind of roll them all into one big question. I have several folks that are asking if you'd be willing to share your information so that other states could use this as a template. And as a second part of that, folks are asking if you'd be willing to share your contact information.
Yes, absolutely. I will be more than happy to share sort of the template and how we got to where we got with this, and would be more than happy to talk to other local directors or other state directors about this program as well. We're incredibly proud of it. Would love to continue to grow that. And for my contact information, we can send it out, but it's Michael, MICHAEL .nix, NIX at GEMA, GEMA.ga.gov.
Thanks, Michael. And in case you didn't catch that when he was giving it to you verbally, we will, I'll add a slide here into the deck at the very end. So in between his slide and this QA slide, so that when the PowerPoint gets saved up to 911.gov, you will all have his email address. With that, I would like to thank all of our presenters today and remind folks that an archived version of today's webinar will be available on 911.gov soon. Our next webinar is scheduled for Tuesday, January the 11th, 2022 at noon Eastern Time. And I would like to also include, stay tuned. We'll provide a list of all of the 2022 webinar dates along with registration links when we send out the information in December. All of previous State of 911 webinars can be found at 911.gov/webinars.html. And so with that, before we end today, I just wanted to share on behalf of the National 911 Program State of 911 webinars, a huge thank you to Lori Flaherty for her tireless contributions in advancing NG911. And we wish you all the best of luck in your retirement. And I'll ask if any of our presenters today have anything else they would like to add.
Lori, this is Kate. You have set us up with such an incredible example of how to run the National 911 program, how to bring this information to this fabulous community, and we will continue Lori's legacy at the National 911 program and honor all of this hard work.
And on behalf of the state 911 directors, I really appreciate your continued support for NASNA and everything that you've done for me as I've come into this role and helped. So I just really appreciate your continued support, Lori. Thank you.
All right. Thank you to everyone once again. And that does conclude today's webinar. I hope you have a great rest of your Tuesday.